The private jet lurched violently to the left, and Alexandra Kent gripped the armrest so hard her knuckles turned white as the pilot's voice crackled through the intercom, announcing an emergency landing due to the worsening blizzard conditions below. She had been on her way back from a medical conference in Boston, eager to return to her small practice in Vermont, where she worked as a rural family physician. The flight had started smoothly enough, but the weather had deteriorated rapidly over the White Mountains, and now they were descending far too quickly for comfort toward what the pilot described as a small private airstrip in the middle of nowhere, New Hampshire. The landing was rough but successful, the small jet skidding slightly on the icy runway before coming to a halt. Alexandra grabbed her medical bag and her overnight case, thanking the pilots as they informed her they would need to wait out the storm before attempting any further flights. The airstrip consisted of a single runway, a small hangar, and what looked like an office building that had seen better days. As she stepped off the plane, the wind hit her like a physical force, snow swirling around her in thick sheets that made it nearly impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. She pulled her coat tighter and started trudging toward the building, her leather boots already soaked through and her teeth chattering. The door to the office building swung open before she reached it, and a tall figure appeared in the doorway, backlit by the warm glow from inside. "Get in here before you freeze to death," a deep male voice called out. Alexandra didn't need to be told twice. She hurried inside, and the man shut the door firmly behind her, cutting off the howling wind. She stood there dripping on the worn linoleum floor, trying to catch her breath as she looked around the small space. It was clearly an office and waiting area, with a few uncomfortable-looking chairs, a desk piled high with papers, and a small kitchenette in the corner. Then she looked at the man who had let her in. He was tall, easily over 6 feet, with dark hair that was slightly disheveled and sharp gray eyes that were currently assessing her with what looked like mild concern. He wore an expensive-looking sweater and dark jeans, and despite the casual clothing, there was something about the way he carried himself that spoke of authority and wealth. "Thank you," she managed, still shivering. "I wasn't expecting the weather to turn so quickly." "Neither was I," he said, his voice carrying a hint of frustration. "I've been stuck here for the past 2 hours. The caretaker left right before the storm hit, and apparently we're not getting out of here anytime soon." Alexandra pulled off her wet coat and hung it on a hook by the door. "How bad is it supposed to get? According to the weather report I pulled up on my phone, this is going to be a major nor'easter. We could be looking at 2 feet of snow or more, and the winds are only going to get worse." He walked over to the kitchenette and pulled out 2 mugs. "Coffee. It's instant, but it's hot." "That sounds amazing, thank you." She set down her bags and joined him, grateful for the warmth starting to seep back into her fingers and toes. "I'm Alexandra, by the way, Alexandra Kent. Everyone calls me Alex." "Harrison Irving," he said, handing her a steaming mug. His handshake was firm and warm when she offered her hand. "Harrison or Harris, either works." She wrapped her hands around the mug and took a sip, grimacing slightly at the bitter taste but grateful nonetheless. "So, what brings you to this charming location, Harrison?" A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "I was flying back from a business meeting in Portland. I own a company that manufactures sustainable building materials. We were discussing a new partnership with a lumber company up there. Sustainable building materials. That's actually really interesting." "What kind of materials?" "Mostly engineered wood products, insulation made from recycled materials, solar roof tiles, that sort of thing. The construction industry is one of the biggest contributors to climate change, so we're trying to change that." He leaned against the counter, studying her. "What about you?" Medical bag suggests you're a doctor, family physician, she confirmed. I have a practice in a small town in Vermont. I was at a conference on rural healthcare access. Not as glamorous as running a company, but I love what I do. Rural medicine is crucial work, Harrison said, and she was surprised by the genuine respect in his tone. My grandmother lived in a town that barely had medical services. She had to drive 2 hours to see a specialist when she got sick. Before Alexandra could respond, the lights flickered once, twice, then went out completely, plunging them into darkness. She heard Harrison curse softly under his breath. "Please tell me there's a backup generator," she said. "There is, but given my luck today, I'm betting it hasn't been serviced in years." She heard him moving in the darkness, then the beam of a flashlight cut through the gloom. "Found a flashlight in the desk drawer earlier. Let me check the generator." "I'm coming with you," Alexandra said quickly. "I'm not staying here alone in the dark." He didn't argue, just handed her the flashlight while he pulled out his phone and turned on its light. They made their way through a back door into the hangar, where the temperature dropped even further. The generator was in a corner, and Harrison knelt down to examine it while Alexandra held the flashlight steady. "It's got fuel," he muttered, checking various components, "but the battery is completely dead. We're not getting this thing started without a jump, and I don't see any jumper cables around here. So we're stuck with no heat." Alexandra tried to keep the worry out of her voice. Harrison stood up, his expression thoughtful. "The office has a fireplace. I saw some wood stacked outside under a tarp earlier. If we can get a fire going, we should be able to keep warm enough. And there's a couch in there that looks like it might fold out." They worked together to bring in armfuls of firewood, making several trips back and forth until they had enough to last through the night. Harrison proved surprisingly adept at building a fire, and soon flames were crackling cheerfully in the old stone fireplace, casting dancing shadows on the walls. "You know your way around a fire," Alexandra observed, settling onto the floor near the hearth and extending her hands toward the warmth. "Summer camps as a kid, then a lot of camping trips in college." He sat down beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. "My father believed that knowing how to survive without modern conveniences built character." Sounds like he was a practical man. "He was a demanding man," Harrison corrected, his tone neutral. "But yes, practical too. He built our company from the ground up, and he expected me to be able to do the same if everything fell apart." There was something in his voice that made Alexandra look at him more closely. In the firelight, his features were sharper, more defined, and she noticed the slight tension in his jaw. "And did you build the company up further, I mean?" "I took what he built and expanded it, diversified into new markets, invested in research and development for greener products." He was content to stay regional. "I went global." He paused, then added quietly, "He died 2 years ago. Heart attack. I like to think he would have been proud of what I have done with the company, but honestly, I'll never know." "I'm sorry," Alexandra said softly. Losing a parent is never easy, especially when there are unresolved feelings. Harrison looked at her, really looked at her, and she felt something shift in the air between them. "You sound like you're speaking from experience." "My father passed away when I was in medical school. Car accident." We had just had a huge fight about my decision to go into rural medicine instead of pursuing a specialty in a big city hospital. He thought I was wasting my potential. She smiled sadly. "I never got to tell him that I was happy with my choice, that I was making a difference in people's lives." "I think he would have figured it out eventually," Harrison said. "Parents usually do." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the fire. Outside, the wind howled and snow continued to pile up against the windows. Alexandra found herself studying Harrison's profile when she thought he wasn't looking. He was handsome, certainly, but it was more than that. There was an intensity about him, a presence that was both commanding and surprisingly gentle. "We should probably figure out our sleeping arrangements," Harrison said eventually. "That couch isn't going to be comfortable for both of us." "I can take the floor," Alexandra offered. "I have slept in worse places during my residency." "Absolutely not. I'll take the floor, you take the couch." "Harrison, that's ridiculous. We're both adults. We can share the couch if it folds out, and if it doesn't, we can take turns or something." He raised an eyebrow. "Are you sure? I don't want you to feel uncomfortable. We're stranded in a snowstorm with limited resources." Comfort went out the window the moment the power went out. Let's just be practical about this. The couch did fold out, though calling it a bed was generous. It was narrow and lumpy, with springs that poked through the thin mattress. They found some dusty blankets in a storage closet and shook them out, and Harrison gave her a sweatshirt he had in his bag to use as an extra layer. As night fell and the temperature continued to drop, they huddled under the blankets near the fire. Despite their best efforts to maintain a respectful distance, the narrow mattress meant they were pressed close together, sharing body heat. "This is probably the strangest Christmas week I have ever had," Alexandra said, staring up at the dark ceiling. "It's almost Christmas." "I lost track of the date. December 23rd. I was supposed to be having dinner with friends tomorrow night." Harrison shifted beside her, and she felt his arm brush against hers. "I was supposed to be at a board meeting followed by a company holiday party. I'm sure they'll manage without me." "Don't you have family waiting for you? Someone who will worry?" "No family left except some distant cousins I barely know, and I'm not currently seeing anyone, if that's what you're asking." There was a hint of amusement in his voice. Alexandra felt her cheeks warm, grateful for the darkness. "I wasn't asking exactly, just making conversation. What about you? Boyfriend wondering where you are?" "No boyfriend. No time, really. My practice keeps me pretty busy, and the dating pool in a small Vermont town is fairly limited." She paused. "That sounded more pathetic than I intended." Harrison laughed, a genuine warm sound that made her smile. "Not pathetic at all. I understand completely. Building a business doesn't leave much time for relationships. I have tried, but it never seems to work out. Women either want me for my money or they resent the time I spend working." "That must be lonely." "It is," he admitted quietly, "but you learn to live with it. Focus on the work, on making a difference. That has to be enough." Alexandra turned her head to look at him, though she could barely make out his features in the dim glow from the fire. "Does it feel like enough?" There was a long pause. "Not always. Not tonight, anyway." She didn't know what to say to that, so she just reached out and found his hand under the blankets, giving it a gentle squeeze. He squeezed back, and they lay there in the darkness, holding hands like teenagers, listening to the storm rage outside. She must have dozed off eventually, because she woke to pale gray light filtering through the windows and the smell of coffee. She sat up, disoriented, to find Harrison crouching by the fire, which he had apparently rebuilt while she slept. He had also somehow managed to make coffee using a pan and the fire. "Good morning," he said, offering her a mug. "It's not great coffee, but it's caffeinated." "You're a miracle worker." She took the mug gratefully and looked toward the windows. The snow was still falling, though not as heavily as the night before, and it had drifted up to cover the lower half of the windows. "We're really snowed in. Completely. I tried the door earlier. We're not getting out without shoveling, and I don't see any shovels in here." Alexandra stood and walked to the window, peering out at the white landscape. "This is incredible. I mean, terrible for being stuck, but look at how beautiful it is." Harrison joined her at the window. "I suppose it is." when you're not worried about frozen pipes and dead generators. She glanced up at him. Are you always this pragmatic? Occupational hazard. When you run a company, you have to think about worst-case scenarios. Well, this is officially a worst-case scenario, so maybe you can take a break from being the boss for a while. She smiled at him. Just be Harrison, stranded in a snowstorm. Something in his expression softened. I'm not sure I remember how to just be Harrison. It's been a while. Lucky for you, you have nothing but time to figure it out. They spent the morning exploring their temporary prison, finding an old deck of cards and a chess set with several missing pieces. They played cards by the fire, making up ridiculous rules when they couldn't remember the real ones, and talked about everything and nothing. Alexandra learned that Harrison had wanted to be an architect when he was younger, that he still sketched building designs in his spare time. He learned that she had almost quit medical school 3 times, that she played the violin badly but enthusiastically, and that she had a weakness for terrible reality TV shows. I'm serious, she insisted, laughing at his incredulous expression. There's something about watching people fight over roses or get voted off islands. It's like junk food for your brain. That might be the most unexpected thing I have learned about you, Harrison said, dealing another hand of cards. Doctor. Alexandra Kent, healer of the sick, champion of rural health care, watches reality TV. Everyone needs a vice. What's yours? He considered this. Old kung fu movies. The worse the dubbing, the better. I can quote almost all of Enter the Dragon. Now that I would pay to see. Give me enough time stuck in here and you might. He grinned at her, and she felt her heart do a strange little flip. As the afternoon wore on, they started getting hungry. The kitchenette had some canned soup, crackers, and various packages of airplane snacks that had clearly been left behind by previous travelers. It wasn't much, but Harrison managed to heat the soup over the fire, and they ate sitting cross-legged on the floor, the blankets wrapped around their shoulders. This is like the world's worst camping trip, Alexandra said, but she was smiling. Or the world's best disaster story. Someday you can tell people about the time you got stranded with a stranger in a snowstorm. You don't feel like a stranger anymore, she said, and immediately wished she could take it back because it sounded too revealing, too honest. But Harrison just looked at her with those gray eyes and said, You don't feel like a stranger to me either. The afternoon stretched into evening, and they fed more wood to the fire, watching the flames dance. Harrison told her about his company, about the projects he was most proud of, the innovations he was excited about. She told him about her patients, the challenges of rural medicine, the joy of knowing everyone in the community she served. There's this woman, Mrs. Patterson, Alexandra said. She's 87 and stubborn as hell. She refuses to take her blood pressure medication because she says it makes her tired. I've been working on her for 2 years, trying different medications, different approaches. Last month, she finally agreed to try one more option, and it's working. Her blood pressure is finally under control, and she has more energy than she has had in years. She brought me cookies to thank me. That's what you do it for, Harrison said. Those moments. Exactly. What about you? What moment made you realize you were doing the right thing with your company? He thought for a moment. There's a housing development in Oregon that used our materials exclusively. Low-income housing, designed to be energy efficient and affordable. I visited the site after the first families moved in, and this little kid ran up to me and said their house was always warm now, even in winter. His mother told me they could barely afford heating in their old place. That's when I knew all the long hours and hard decisions were worth it. Alexandra felt a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with the fire. You're doing important work, Harrison. You should be proud. So should you. They looked at each other across the fire, and Alexandra felt the air between them charge with something electric, something inevitable. She knew she should look away, should maintain the comfortable friendship they had built over the past day and a half, but she couldn't. Harrison moved first, shifting closer to her side of the fire. "Alexandra," he said softly, "can I ask you something? Anything? If we weren't stuck here, if we had met under normal circumstances, would you have wanted to get to know me?" Her breath caught. "Yes. Absolutely yes." "Good," he said, and then he was cupping her face gently with one hand, his thumb brushing her cheek. "Because I haven't been able to stop thinking about you since you walked through that door." When he kissed her, it was soft and tentative at first, a question more than a demand. But when she responded, her hands coming up to grip his shoulders, the kiss deepened, became something more urgent and real. She felt like she was falling and flying at the same time, every nerve in her body alive and singing. They broke apart finally, both breathing hard, foreheads pressed together. "That was," Alexandra started, then couldn't find the words. "Yeah," Harrison agreed. "It really was." They kissed again, and this time when they pulled apart, Harrison gathered her into his arms, holding her close as they lay back on the makeshift bed. She rested her head on his chest, listening to the steady thump of his heartbeat, feeling safer and more content than she had in years. "This is crazy," she whispered. "We barely know each other." "I know," he said, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her back. "But it doesn't feel crazy. It feels right." And it did feel right, impossibly right, which terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. They talked through the night, sharing more stories, more pieces of themselves. Harrison told her about the pressure of living up to his father's legacy, the loneliness of being at the top with no one to share it with. Alexandra told him about her fears that she wasn't making enough of a difference, that her small practice was just a drop in the ocean of need. "You're making all the difference to the people you treat," Harrison said firmly. "Never doubt that." "And you're changing an entire industry," she countered. "Your father would be proud. I'm sure of it." As dawn broke on Christmas Eve morning, they discovered that the snow had finally stopped. The world outside was transformed into a pristine white wonderland, beautiful and deadly in equal measure. "Someone will come looking for us eventually," Harrison said, standing at the window with his arm around Alexandra's waist. "The pilots will have reported their location, and the airstrip owner will check on the property." "I know," Alexandra said, but she felt a pang of regret. This bubble they had created, this space out of time, would soon burst and reality would come crashing back in. Harrison seemed to sense her thoughts because he turned her to face him. "This doesn't end when we leave here," he said firmly. "I don't want it to. You live in, where, New York, Boston. New York, but Alexandra, I don't care about the logistics. We'll figure it out. I just know that I'm not ready to say goodbye to you." "I'm not ready either," she admitted. "But Harrison, you need to understand that my life is in Vermont. My practice, my patients, they need me. I can't just leave." "I'm not asking you to leave. I would never ask you to give up your work." He took both her hands in his. "We'll figure it out. I can work remotely some of the time. I can visit. You can visit me. Whatever it takes." Before she could respond, they heard the sound of an engine outside, then voices calling out. The rescue had arrived. The next few hours were a blur of activity. The airstrip owner, a gruff man named Carl, had brought a snowplow and helped dig out the building. The pilots had been rescued earlier and were already working to clear the runway. Within a few hours, Harrison's jet was ready to fly. Standing beside the plane, the wind whipping around them, Alexandra felt the full weight of their impending separation. "Come with me to New York," Harrison said suddenly. "Spend Christmas with me, just a few days. Then I'll bring you home, I promise." She should say no. She should be practical and sensible and protect her heart. But when she looked into his eyes and saw the hope and vulnerability there, she found herself nodding. "Okay," she said. "Yes." His smile was brilliant, and he kissed her right there in front of the pilots and Carl, neither of them caring who saw. The flight to New York was smooth, and Alexandra watched the snowy landscape give way to increasingly urban sprawl. Harrison held her hand the entire time, occasionally lifting it to press a kiss to her knuckles. His penthouse apartment in Manhattan was stunning, all floor-to-ceiling windows and modern design, but Alexandra barely noticed the decor. She was too busy being kissed by Harrison in the elevator, in the hallway, and finally against the closed door of his apartment. "I can't believe you're here," he murmured against her lips. "I was so afraid you would say no." "I was afraid I would say no too," she admitted, "but I couldn't. I didn't want to." They spent Christmas Eve cooking dinner together in his massive kitchen. Harrison proved to be a surprisingly good cook, and they made pasta from scratch, laughing when the dough stuck to everything and they ended up covered in flour. Later, they sat on his couch overlooking the glittering city lights, and Harrison gave her a small wrapped box. "I can't accept expensive gifts," Alexandra protested. "It's not expensive. Just open it." Inside was a delicate silver compass necklace. "So you always find your way," Harrison said softly, fastening it around her neck. "And maybe so you'll find your way back to me." She kissed him, deeply and sweetly, and whispered, "I'll always find my way back to you." On Christmas morning, they walked through Central Park in the snow, hand in hand like any other couple, and Alexandra felt happiness bubble up inside her. They had hot chocolate from a street vendor and watched children play in the snow, and it was perfect. But reality intruded eventually, as it always does. Alexandra needed to get back to her practice, and Harrison had business obligations that couldn't be postponed indefinitely. "This isn't the end," Harrison said as he drove her to the airport 2 days later. "This is just the beginning." "Promise me we'll make this work," Alexandra said, fighting back tears. "Promise me this wasn't just a beautiful moment out of time." "I promise," he said fiercely. "Alexandra, I'm falling in love with you. I know it's fast and crazy, but it's true, and I'm not letting you go without a fight." "I'm falling in love with you too," she whispered, and saying it out loud made it real and terrifying and wonderful. They kissed goodbye at the airport, and Alexandra boarded the commercial flight to Vermont with her heart full and her mind racing. She had no idea how they were going to make this work, but she was determined to try. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of phone calls and video chats. Harrison called her every morning before she started her rounds and every night before she went to bed. They talked about their days, their hopes, their fears. He sent her flowers at her clinic, making her nurses giggle and tease her mercilessly. 3 weeks after the snowstorm, Harrison showed up at her clinic unannounced. "What are you doing here?" Alexandra gasped, abandoning her patient charts to throw herself into his arms. "I missed you," he said simply, "and I wanted to see your world, see where you work and live." He stayed for 4 days, charming her staff and her patients, helping her paint her living room and shoveling snow from her elderly neighbors' driveways. He fit into her life so naturally that when he left, the absence felt like a physical ache. "Come with me to the conference in Seattle next month," he said before he left. "I have to give a keynote speech. I'd love to have you there." She went and watched him command a room of hundreds with his passion and vision for sustainable building. She had never been more proud or more attracted to someone in her life. They fell into a pattern over the next months. Harrison worked remotely from Vermont as often as he could, renting a small house near her clinic. When he needed to be in New York, Alexandra visited when her schedule allowed. It wasn't perfect, but it was theirs. 6 months after the snowstorm, Harrison invited her to dinner at a fancy restaurant in Burlington. She suspected something was up when he seemed nervous, stumbling over his words in a way that was completely unlike him. "I've been thinking," he started, then stopped. "Actually, I've been thinking about this since about day 2 of being trapped in that airstrip." "Thinking about what?" Alexandra prompted, her heart starting to race. "About forever. About building a life with you, really building it, not just this long-distance thing we're doing." He reached across the table and took her hand. "I want to move to Vermont. I want to be where you are. I can run my company from anywhere, and honestly, being here with you has made me happier than I've been in years." "Harrison, you can't just uproot your entire life for me." "I'm not uprooting my life. I'm planting new roots, better ones, stronger ones, with you." He paused. "If you'll have me." "Are you asking what I think you're asking?" He stood up then, pulling a small box from his pocket and dropping to one knee right there in the restaurant. "Alexandra Kent, you walked into my life during a snowstorm and turned my entire world upside down. You made me remember what it's like to be just Harrison, not the CEO or the heir or the business mogul. You made me want things I didn't think I was allowed to want anymore. I love you completely and absolutely. Will you marry me?" Through happy tears, she said yes. The wedding was small and intimate, held in the town square in Alexandra's Vermont town on a beautiful fall day. Harrison's business associates mixed with her patients and friends, and everyone agreed they had never seen a happier couple. Harrison kept his promise and moved to Vermont, purchasing a beautiful farmhouse just outside of town that they renovated together using his company's sustainable materials. He set up a home office and proved that he could run a global company from anywhere with good internet and determination. A year after they married, Alexandra was organizing a medical supply closet when Harrison found her sitting on the floor, tears streaming down her face. "What's wrong?" he asked urgently, dropping to his knees beside her. She handed him the pregnancy test she was holding, watching his face transform from concern to shock to pure joy. "We're having a baby," he breathed. "We're having a baby," she confirmed, and he kissed her and held her and told her he loved her over and over. Their daughter, Emily, was born on a snowy December evening 8 months later. Harrison held her with tears in his eyes and said, "She looks like you, thank God." "She has your eyes," Alexandra countered, stroking the baby's soft cheek. 2 years later, their son Harrison Jr., called Hank, arrived, and their family felt complete. Alexandra continued her practice, though she cut back her hours to spend more time with the children. Harrison thrived in Vermont, discovering a love for community involvement and local politics. He started a foundation that helped fund rural health care initiatives, combining both his and Alexandra's passions. On their 5th wedding anniversary, they returned to the airstrip in New Hampshire, where they had first been stranded. The owner, Carl, had retired, and the place was for sale. Harrison bought it on the spot. "What are you going to do with it?" Alexandra asked, bemused. "Turn it into a community center," he said. "A place for the local community to gather, and maybe keep that office with the fireplace as a private space, for anniversary visits." She laughed and kissed him. "You're ridiculous. You love me anyway." "I do. So much." They stood there together, watching the snow begin to fall, and Alexandra thought about how a random snowstorm had given her everything she never knew she needed. She had been on her way home from a conference, focused on her work and her patients, content with her solitary life. Then Harrison Irving had opened a door and let her in from the cold, and nothing had been the same since. 10 years after that first snowstorm, they hosted Christmas at their farmhouse, which was full to bursting with family and friends. Emily, now 8, was teaching Hank 6 how to build a snowman in the front yard while Harrison's business partner and his wife chatted with Alexandra's nurse and her husband by the fire. Alexandra stood in the kitchen, watching through the window as Harrison joined the children outside, scooping Emily up and spinning her around while Hank pelted him with snowballs. Her heart felt so full it might burst. Her friend and fellow doctor, Jennifer, came up beside her. "You're disgustingly happy, you know that?" "I really am," Alexandra agreed. "Sometimes I still can't believe how lucky I got." "Luck had nothing to do with it. You two were meant for each other. Anyone can see that." Maybe Jennifer was right. Maybe it wasn't luck but fate that had brought that snowstorm, that had forced their planes to land at that specific airstrip, that had put them in the same place at the same time. Or maybe it was just random chance, and what mattered was what they had chosen to do with it. Either way, Alexandra wouldn't change a single thing. That night, after the guests had left and the children were tucked into bed, Harrison and Alexandra sat by their fireplace, wrapped in blankets, just as they had been that first night. "Do you ever think about how different our lives would be if that storm hadn't happened?" Alexandra asked. "All the time," Harrison admitted. "I think about who I was before I met you. So focused on work, so lonely, so convinced that was just how life had to be. You changed everything." "You changed everything for me too. I thought I was happy, but I was just content. There's a difference. You taught me that." He pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Best snowstorm of my life." "Worst snowstorm that turned into the best thing that ever happened," she corrected. "I love you, Alexandra Irving." "I love you too, Harrison Irving. Forever." Outside, snow began to fall again, soft and gentle, covering the world in white. But inside, wrapped in her husband's arms, Alexandra was warm and safe and loved. The storm that had stranded them together had indeed brought forever, just as neither of them had expected. Years continued to pass in their beautiful life together. Emily grew into a thoughtful teenager with her mother's compassion and her father's business sense. She talked about becoming a doctor like her mom, but one who specialized in environmental health. Hank was quieter, more artistic, spending hours sketching building designs with his father, showing an early aptitude for architecture. Harrison's company continued to thrive, becoming a leader in sustainable construction materials worldwide. But he remained based in Vermont, traveling only when absolutely necessary, never wanting to miss the important moments with his family. He coached Hank's soccer team, attended every one of Emily's violin recitals, despite her insistence that she was terrible, and made sure to have dinner with his family every night he was home. Alexandra expanded her practice, bringing on 2 more doctors to serve the growing community. She also started a telemedicine program that allowed her to consult with patients in even more remote areas, extending her reach while still maintaining the personal touch that made her such a beloved physician. The community center that Harrison had created at the old airstrip became a beloved gathering place for the small New Hampshire town nearby. They held town meetings there, community dinners, and every December 23rd, they hosted a celebration of the snowstorm that had changed 2 lives forever. On their 15th anniversary, Harrison surprised Alexandra with a trip back to Boston, where she had been heading home from all those years ago. They stayed in a beautiful hotel and attended a medical conference together, Harrison sitting in on her presentations with obvious pride. "You know," he said as they walked through the snowy city streets hand in hand, "I was supposed to be in New York that day. I changed my meeting to Portland at the last minute because of a scheduling conflict." "I almost didn't go to that conference," Alexandra admitted. "I was exhausted and considered skipping it. My nurse convinced me I needed the break. They stopped walking and looked at each other. "All those little decisions," Harrison said softly. "All those tiny moments that led us to exactly where we needed to be." "To each other," Alexandra finished. "To forever," Harrison added, and kissed her there on the snowy Boston street, just as he had kissed her that first time in front of a fire in a cold office building, when they were strangers who somehow knew they were meant to be something more. The storm had brought them together, but it was love, effort, and commitment that had built their forever. And as they walked back to their hotel through the gently falling snow, Alexandra thought about the scared, cold woman who had stumbled through a door into Harrison's life, and the lonely man who had opened it. They had both been searching for something without knowing it, and they had found it in each other during the worst and best snowstorm of their lives. 20 years after that first storm, they renewed their vows in the same town square where they had married, surrounded by their adult children, their friends, and the community they had built together. Emily had just finished medical school and was starting a residency in environmental medicine. Hank had been accepted into an architecture program at a prestigious university. As Harrison slipped a new ring onto Alexandra's finger and promised to love her for another 20 years and beyond, she looked into his gray eyes and saw the same intensity and gentleness that had captured her heart in that cold office during a snowstorm. "Forever," he whispered, so only she could hear. "Forever," she echoed back. The storm that had stranded them together had indeed brought forever, wrapping them in its cold embrace only to warm their hearts with a love that would last all their days. And every time it snowed, they remembered that first night, that first kiss, that first moment when they realized that sometimes the universe conspires to put you exactly where you need to be, with exactly who you need to be with. Some people never find that kind of love. Some people search their whole lives for a connection that real, that deep, that transformative. Harrison and Alexandra had found it in the most unexpected place, during the most unlikely circumstances, and they had held on to it with everything they had. And on cold winter nights, they still sat by the fire in their farmhouse, wrapped in blankets, holding hands and talking about everything and nothing. They still felt that same spark, that same magic, that had ignited between them when they were strangers stranded in a snowstorm. Because some loves are written in the stars, destined and fated and meant to be, and some loves are written in the snow, temporary and fragile and beautiful, requiring nurturing and care to make them last. Harrison and Alexandra's love was both. Written in starlight and snowflakes, destined and chosen, fated and fought for. It was a love story that began with a storm and bloomed into forever, proving that sometimes the worst situations lead to the best outcomes, and that being stranded can actually mean being found. Their children would tell the story to their own children someday. The tale of how Grandma and Grandpa met during a terrible snowstorm and fell in love in a cold office building with nothing but a fire and each other for warmth. And those grandchildren would ask, as children do, if it was love at first sight. And Alexandra and Harrison would look at each other and smile, thinking about that first moment when she stumbled through the door, wet and cold, and he let her into the warmth. Was it love at first sight? Maybe not. But it was recognition at first sight, a knowing that this person was important, that this moment mattered, that their lives had just irrevocably changed. The rest was just details. Beautiful, challenging, joyful, difficult, wonderful details that made up a life well lived and a love well earned. The snowstorm had brought them together, trapped them in close quarters, forced them to really see each other without the distractions of normal life. But they had chosen to stay together, to build a life, to create forever out of a few desperate hours in the cold. And that choice, renewed every day for decades, was what made their love story truly extraordinary. As they sat by their fire on their 50th anniversary, both gray-haired and lined with age but with eyes still bright with love, Harrison pulled Alexandra close and said, "Best snowstorm of my life." And she laughed, the same laugh that had captivated him all those years ago, and replied, "Best stranding I ever experienced." Outside, snow began to fall, as it often did in Vermont winters, blanketing the world in white. And inside, two people who had once been strangers held each other close, grateful for the storm that had brought them together and the love that had kept them together through every season that followed. Forever, as it turned out, was exactly as long as they had hoped it would be.